What's up, everybody? Let me get my stuff here all set up and ready to go. I know it's an awkward time, 2 o'clock p.m. for Facebook Live with Mel and Charlie. Special guest today, Dr. Jerome Kim, all the way from South Korea, Director General of the International Vaccine Institute. He's been on our show a few times in the past. It's been a while, so I'm anxious to hear from him all the updates. And I have been really thinking about what Dr. Tim Brown and Dr. Lee Altenberg shared with us last week. And I guess it bothers me because we're definitely not out of the pandemic, but so many of our leaders have basically conceded, and they're actually acknowledging the fact that we're done. I watched the governor's, I guess it ended up being a debate. I thought it was pretty fun on Spotlight this morning. And, it just appears that everyone's just okay with moving forward. And I cannot imagine them saying that if they knew what we have been learning from uh, Dr. Altenberg and Dr. Brown and other experts in the field, other experts around the country. If you follow this, like I do, and I'm sure many of you do, you realize that this BA4, BA5 variant is nothing to mess around with. Now, I don't know what Dr. Kim will say. He obviously is much more versed in this topic than I, but it's just been bothering me what the two doctors told us last week, and the fact that 15 more deaths today reported. Is that acceptable? Apparently, for our state, it is acceptable enough that no adjustments are going to be made. Um, anyway, yeah, I know it's a surprise for many of you. I try to post on all the platforms to let everybody know it was a special time, but we got to work around the schedules of our guests. I took off today just so that there's no, when you work county or government, you get plenty of people watching, and if they say, hey, blah blah blah, so I just took off. I took off the whole day today, catch up on some errands, catch up on some things that I need to get done, and then accommodate Dr. Jerome Kim. It's not often we have the opportunity to have an expert of this level join us. So I'm excited. I see he's in the green room. I'm not seeing video though, so I'm not sure. But let me bring him in.
My video not working.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Let's see. No. I bet.
Not yet. Oh, there we go. There we go. Oh, there you go. Okay, we got something halfway through the. There you go.
For some reason, my camera I can't figure out how to switch cameras, but.
Well, we can hear you loud and clear. We can see you.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I know
It's my pleasure.
It's
Sorry.
early morning there in South Korea, right?
No, it's not too bad. 9 o'clock.
Oh, 9 o'clock. Okay, but it's already Thursday.
It's already Thursday. Yeah.
It's already Thursday. So
we're 5 hours behind, but a day ahead.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Well, let me just say real quick, Dr. Jerome Kim, he's the Director General of the International Vaccine Institute located there in South Korea, which is where he's coming from, thanks to the technology today. And I know it's an awkward time, 2 o'clock, so I know most of our viewers will be watching this on the replay, but we do have about 50 people on right now live, and they have been waiting for this moment for months and months and months. So welcome, 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 Doc. How you doing? I know you've been a busy guy. This guy travels all over the world. He's being recognized by all kinds of organizations. First of all, thank you for your work, my friend.
Oh no, it's my pleasure. And it's been interesting to start traveling again, because the testing requirements are sometimes bewildering. And there's always the test when we come back home. So.
Well, not if you travel to Hawaii, though.
Not if we. Well, let's see. No, we still have to get tested back in Korea.
Oh yeah, when you return.
Yeah. When we return back to not I guess Korea has been our home for 7 years, but our home is, we think, in Hawaii. So
Yeah,
our home.
Dr. Kim is from Oahu. For those of you that may not have seen him before, he's originally from Oahu. Served time in the U.S. Army as a doctor, and now again runs the program over there in South Korea. So, okay. Anyway, so Doc, why don't we just start off by giving us an overview of COVID? I'm sure you know how Hawaii is kind of withdrawn from the discussion already. They report weekly, but in your observations, as you monitor the world, really, what are you seeing as it relates to COVID? And we'll get into the discussions of the vaccines, future vaccines, the new COVID being A4, BA5. But generally speaking, what are you seeing around the world as it relates to COVID?
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, mortality is down. I think that the previous wave of infections, first Delta and then Omicron, which each were associated with a lot of illnesses and deaths, um, has resulted in, at least for the next 3 to 6 months, some level of protective immune response. And that seems to be that protection doesn't protect people against further infection. In fact, we know that you can be infected. Actually, you've been infected with BA1 and then be infected by BA4, 5. But it does reduce the risk of severe disease, hospitalization, and death. And those are the important things that we look at. Although a colleague of mine reminded me that, you know, we believe that vaccination reduces long COVID, which may strike up to 20% of people who have COVID infection. But there are consequences other than hospitalization and death that we have to take into account. I mean, here in Korea, if a person tests positive, you know, hopefully they inform their working place. They don't go to work, and people who are exposed go and get tested themselves. Um, and it decreases the amount of time that people, can work, and it causes disruption in schedules. And we've had people have to cancel flights because they tested positive within 7 days of a flight. So they're still in quarantine. So, it's good that vaccination and infection have prevented some of the worst consequences of Omicron infection. On the other hand, we know that Omicron is evolving, and so what was originally BA1, the original one, um, and then BA2, which was a variation on that, and BA2 possibly evolved into 4 and 5. So the two are linked, and there's another variant of BA2, which has a longer set, 2.12. Um, is also evolving and can escape from some of the immune protection that was even conferred by the original Omicron. So what we're seeing now is that these outbreaks that are occurring in vaccinated or partially infected populations have the potential to spread, and continue to mutate themselves. And when will we see a mutation that actually makes the disease worse in people who have previous immune responses? We don't know. Um, it may come, and the part of the problem with saying, well, bad things are coming, bad things are coming, bad things are coming. Well, people look at these surges of infections with no hospitalizations, and they say, okay, well, nothing to worry about. And what we don't want is, we need to be realistic, um, but we can't be complacent. The government at least needs to track what's going on so that they know and are on top of it in case something comes up. And unfortunately, with COVID, something has always come up. So that's the pandemic, I guess, in a nutshell. I mean, in Korea, which peaked at 600,000 infections a day, but never had more than 1,400 people in ICUs, which in a country of 51 million is, they had set aside 2,000 beds for the maximum, and they hit 1,400 with 600,000 infections a day. And that's, the power of vaccination. Um, you can do that the hard way, I guess, by having vaccination and infection. But again, it's done what it's supposed to do, and we're hoping that continues. I think the next question is, what's happening in the rest of the world, in the parts of the world that, where 85% of people are not vaccinated. And it's been difficult to convince countries. to undertake vaccination programs. And the reason is, we didn't have diagnostics. So they didn't know that people were getting infected and dying until we started checking a year and a half later. And then we knew that 90 to 100% of people in those countries had been infected. Some of them had presumably died, but we didn't have any diagnosis of COVID. So the countries are saying, well, we don't seem to have had much of a problem. In fact, the number of deaths, the current number is like 6.3 million. The actual estimate's between 15 and 20 million, but a lot of those just weren't recorded. And so we're having to deal with and catch up with some of the things that were a problem in the beginning. And that's going to interfere with uptake of new vaccines and could potentially be the source of new infections and new variants as we look 3 to 6 months down the line. We made a lot of discussion about how we didn't have enough vaccine, and I think many people who are following this know that Pfizer and Moderna have new variations on the vaccine. We call it, they're usually two vaccines put together, the original one and one of the Omicrons, usually the original Omicron. And they presented some data to the US FDA. The FDA hasn't formally said that this would be good enough to go forward. But I think we're all waiting. And the question will be, if that's approved, when will it be available, and how quickly can they increase the number of doses to provide vaccine, at least to the people at greatest risk first. And we're looking at October, November before that vaccine becomes available. And if the FDA decides to move the goalposts a little and say, well, we don't want BA1, we want BA4-5, then that will take even longer. So again, the situation is evolving, and I think people are keeping a very close eye on it. There's been some changes in the vaccines, and there could be, it could be, as we had said, I think, and many people on your show have said, it could be that the vaccines are like the flu vaccine. It's going to be a combination of 3 or 4 different strains that are going to be tried to be predicted the year before, and then made by the companies and then used in the next year. So we don't know what the FDA is going to say about that ultimately.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of information that floats around, especially on the internet. But as it relates to Korea, how is the government responding? Obviously, you're past that peak of 600,000 cases a day, but we already understand that Korea has a testing requirement when you come back into the country after travel. But does Korea have surveillance testing? Does Korea have safety precautions in place, mask mandates, so forth? Or is Korea pretty much open, aside for the arrival requirements?
Yeah, so they aren't doing as much tracking as they used to. When we're at about 10,000, a bit over 10,000 cases today or yesterday, which is actually slightly higher than last week. So it's not clear if this is the beginning of a new set of infections, maybe with BA4 and 5. We don't know yet. It may come back down. It usually goes up in the beginning of the week and then peaks in the middle of the week and goes down by the end of the week. But they are still doing testing, and confirmatory testing in particular. So if you're at home, you're not feeling well, you have a sore throat or cough and fever, you do your home test, and then to confirm that they'll do a test in the local district health center. And that's usually how they make the formal diagnosis. And if you need treatment or anything, then they can follow you up that way. When you come in, so you come in now, and you can actually be tested at the airport, or you can go to one of the local testing centers the next day, or you can sometimes, if we're in a hurry and we have to have a meeting the next day, we'll go to a place where you pay, I think it's $100, and they'll give you a PCR test result back within 2 to 3 hours. And then you're supposed to test using a rapid antigen test at day 3 on your own. And so again, they don't send you a reminder. They don't, come after you. They just ask that you do that on your own. And if it's positive, then to report it. And then you have this automatic calendar thing that they send you that, where you check symptoms for a day, for 7 days, and report it back automatically on your cell phone. I'm not sure how many people are filling that out. In fact, sometimes I forget a day, but they don't. In the past, they would have called you, but they don't anymore. So, but the government has changed. So we switched from, I guess, more liberal government to a slightly more conservative government. But a lot of the policies are still in place. The mask mandate for wearing a mask outside if you're not in a big crowd is gone. So for the first time in 2.5 years, I could run outside without a mask on. That was great. Um, but in settings where if you were packed in a crowd or at a demonstration, or if like my daughter goes to a concert outside and the people are packed in together, they still require masks. They have some rules about shouting also. You can imagine these K-pop star concerts might have a lot of shouting and jumping up and down, and they're trying to, I guess, discourage that. But I haven't seen one since the mask mandate went off completely.
In indoor masking, is that required in Korea as well, or
And so
did they
we're still
just
using
for
masks
outside?
indoors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's the debate, right? The everlasting debate about masks, whether they work or whether they don't work. I know for Hawaii, and I believe for every jurisdiction, if you look at the charts and if you can measure the spike or the case counts from after the removal of a safety measure, whether it's indoor masking or it's very obvious that every time we did that, the cases rise. I mean, it goes without saying. I mean, if that's not enough proof that masks work, I don't know what is. But what's your opinion on masking, and should we? CDC recommended for Hawaii or for any red state, if you were not diagnosed, but if you're considered or classified as a red state because of your case counts per
Hmm.
capita and so forth, that you will they strongly recommend masking. Well, we're there in Hawaii, but we never reinstated the mask mandate. What are your thoughts on the masking? And we got school going to be coming up shortly. The governor has stated that he's going to sounds like he's going to continue the masking in school. But what's your
Hmm.
thoughts on masking indoors and in fact in schools?
So I think it's really important to remember again, and we've talked about this before, right? Masking doesn't necessarily protect you as well as it protects other people. I mean, it's the same idea. Would you want your surgeon to be standing over you without a mask on? And really, that's actually not protecting the surgeon, the mask. It's protecting you from getting infected by the surgeon. So masks really protect other people in case you're infected and don't know it. And with Omicron, maybe 50% of people, 40 to 60% are asymptomatic. So I was on a discussion with a guy from the UK. He's the person who ran their pandemic influenza program, and he said, the statistics from Scotland and the UK indicate that right now about 5% of the population has active infection, and not all of it is diagnosed. That's their estimate, their best estimate, and that means that actually it's 5% in England and slightly higher or lower in Scotland. But the idea was that during the course of a day, if you pass 20 people, one of them, or talk to 20 people, one of them is infected, and without a mask, that person is infected. You don't have a mask, and you're going to have a risk of infection. And with Omicron, it's a fairly efficient virus when it comes to avoiding the immune responses and infecting people. I think other people are saying, well, but the good news is that you don't get too sick, and that's true. In general, the vaccination or previous infection or the combination is very effective at that. And the question is, how disruptive is this in schools? And at some point, are we going to say, well, it doesn't matter if you're infected. If you're infected, you should be at home, but we're not going to enforce it. And again, when do I wear a mask? When I'm traveling in Europe, where there are very few masks, we usually ask the people if they mind if we're without masks. When I'm in an airplane, I was sitting on the flight from Sweden to Holland, to the Netherlands, in row 32 in seat C, so the last row back of the airplane. And they don't turn the air conditioning, the ventilation system on until the airplane is getting ready to pull away. And so you're in this, tube with no ventilation or minimal ventilation, surrounded by people. some of whom are infected. And so I put on a mask, even though it wasn't required on the flight. Um, there were two of us on the entire plane who were masked. Um, so, I think it's, and again, knowing that the mask probably isn't as efficient protecting me as it is if other people were wearing masks. But, again, it's difficult to do when you're not in a setting where there's greater use of masks indoors. I mean, Europe, it was non-existent. Um,
I think we're seeing that here in Hawaii now.
yeah.
Every day goes by, more and more people are not wearing masks, and I think a lot of it has to do with the media reporting on the minimal symptoms, on the fact that hospitalizations and deaths. Last week our numbers only come out every week now,
Hmm.
and I think this morning it comes out every Wednesday, and today I believe it was like 5,700 cases. These are only reported cases that are reported from the PCR stations, the hospitals or the
Right.
clinics. No home tests are being reported. So the estimate, is the case count is quite higher. But um, people are hearing that not as many people are getting sick, not as or
Hmm.
severely ill, and they're starting to be very complacent. And I know right now, I know three people that have come back from the mainland and are now sick, not just asymptomatic, but sick with COVID. And they're trying to figure out where they got them from. And I'm telling them, it's probably the airport or the airplane. I mean,
Yeah. Or-
the airports are, again, no one's wearing masks. And the airplanes, we went to visit our kids in Oregon, both ways. Very, yeah, maybe 10% of the passengers are wearing masks,
Mhm.
and people wonder why the we cannot lower the case counts or get rid of this. But you think about it, 5,700 cases in 1 week. That's pretty significant for our state.
Mhm.
um, and we don't even know the accurate number of BA4 BA5 because the sequencing, they don't do very many
Right.
sequencing tests. But uh, that's my concern now as we move forward, is the BA4 BA5. It has been detected in Hawaii, and we know how rapidly the BA4 BA5 starts to spread. Is that an issue in Korea, in South Korea right now, the BA4 BA5?
Yeah, so I think, I don't know the proportion in Korea, but in the United States, it's about 50%. So I would suspect that Hawaii is not going to be very different since it gets tourists from all over the country. Um, in Korea, there is BA4 and BA5, definitely. And I don't know the proportion, but I would guess that it's fairly significant. I mean, the issue, I guess, is how much longer are we going to be able to count on the immunity from the original Omicron infections that happened in January and February, and we know that immune responses decrease over time, so that people will become infected and will still likely be protected against the worst outcomes. But having a cough or sore throat or feeling tired or sick for a month or two after the original infection is not pleasant, and you know it, this isn't like this isn't necessarily like the flu. And I think I don't know if gave the statistic on this on your show, but the in Korea, because they were tracking things and they were doing a really good job, it's actually easier to look at what Omicron is and what it does. So if they look at the over 60 population, and I'm in that population, right? And you weren't vaccinated, the mortality rate from Omicron was 5%, which is not small. It's not, like just getting a cold. If you had Delta, it was 10%. So Omicron is definitely more severe than less severe than Delta. Now, if you were vaccinated, got your regular primary series, two shots, you had a mortality rate of 2%. So it goes from 5% to 2%. If you were boosted, it was 0.2%. So you can see the impact of vaccination on mortality rate. But Omicron is not a benign thing, and there are still uninfected people out there. Maybe the United States is between 60 and 80% seropositive or vaccinated now, maybe even higher. But there are still going to be people out there who haven't been vaccinated. So if you haven't been vaccinated, haven't been infected, you should strongly consider getting vaccinated.
Vaccines. We have heard a lot about um, potential new vaccines coming out, Novavax. We're hearing that these companies are all scrambling to try to get variant specific. I know you earlier you said that it may end up being like the flu where they put a couple of variants, vaccines for a few variants in one dose. But what is the future of vaccines for COVID, um, especially since the future is so unknown as far as variants and so forth?
Yeah, and so I think now, it's different in different countries, but for instance, in the United States with the FDA, they just had a big meeting. I don't know if the videotape is available, but you could just log in and listen to it, where they discussed what to do. And the companies presented their clinical data, so that the data from testing in humans, and then some animal data. The clinical data, said that they have Omicron vaccines. They're to the original Omicron. They generate very strong protective or immune responses against the original Omicron strain, so the strain from 6 months ago. Um, they don't do as well against BA4 and BA5, but they still, they do generate a response. We call it cross-protective response against BA4 and BA5. It may be that using the original, we call it Wuhan strain, plus the BA1 Omicron, is better. It's hard to tell, but one of the reasons to make the two vaccines, is that as you vaccinate children who've not been exposed before, you may want the original protection against Wuhan, as the most of the responses we study are in people who've been previously vaccinated. So this gives a person who's never been vaccinated before, the same start that people had originally when we first started vaccinating. So it's hard to say because the FDA didn't reach a decision and hasn't made a recommendation yet, but it seems that they're leaning towards at least having two strains, the original strain plus an Omicron, and they haven't specified which one. The data would argue that we should work on 4 and 5. The the unfortunate fact is that we have one. We have BA1. We have Wuhan and BA1. And if we wait for 4 and 5, it's going to be months before we actually have a vaccine. So do we go now with something that we have, or do we wait and try and catch up to where we are today, knowing that 6 months from now the pandemic could be very different? So the FDA has a tough decision to make. Um, some people think that they should just go with what they have. We should not let the best be the enemy of the better. Um, and we may never catch up. I mean, that's the other thing that some people are arguing. So I don't have an answer. If they had if they had a bivalent vaccine, would I take it? Since I'm 6 months out from my last shot, I probably would. I haven't been infected yet. I'm kind of waiting for the shoe to drop. Um, but if I had a different vaccine, I would take it. Novavax. So they actually make Novavax here in Korea as well. Um, as an alternative to a bivalent vaccine, would I take Novavax? Yes, I would. It's different. It's got a different. It's a protein rather than an RNA, and the adjuvant. It's not only the portion of the outer coat of the COVID-19 virus, but it's mixed with a chemical substance that greatly improves the protective response, we hope, and appears to be it gives you higher levels, so you get a bit more cross protection. Um, so, I don't know when it will be available, or if I walk into the Army base here, Camp Humphreys, and ask for a shot if I'll get Novavax or not.
You said something quite interesting I never thought of before is when you mentioned, all of the studies that have been done. It were studies that were done on vaccinated people, one shot, two shot, boosted. and now we're having new versions of the or these new versions of the vaccine. All these trials that you mentioned are being tested on people that have already been vaccinated, but we don't have any data to show what the possible impacts or effects of giving the new version to a person that has never been vaccinated. That's quite intriguing when you think about it. It's are the results of the studies that have been done, is it successful because of the built up protection from one, two, maybe even three shots versus someone that is taking this newer version as their initial shot? That's quite interesting.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting question, and I think some of the questions in the chat are interesting as well. The So it's, the virus is a complex structure, right? It's not only the little spike particles on the outside that we normally see, but there are other elements within. And so if you were to get, we call it the whole inactivated virus vaccine from China, or the one from the British company, British, French, Austrian, Swedish company Valneva, you're actually getting your immune responses responding to something that's a lot more natural and has all the components in it. um, what the Chinese vaccine developers found is that with their whole inactivated vaccine, to start to get responses to the other parts of the virus, you needed at least 3 doses rather than two. Um, what we find is if you use for instance, the original, the Wuhan spike, as we call it now, if you use that as the initial set of vaccines, so you got, your first 2 doses and you got boosted, and you might have even gotten a fourth booster. If you get infected, the immune system preferentially remembers the things that it's seen before. So that means that rather than getting the broader kind of immune response you get if you were naturally infected first, the immune response says, "Oh, I've seen that spike thing before. I'm going to make a lot of because it's already ready. It's sitting there. It's the ammunition you have on the shelf." So that gets, the immune system uses that first. If you were to be infected, or if you got vaccinated, infected, and then vaccinated again, the immune response has a wide number of things to pick on, and actually you may get a broader. In fact, that's what we're seeing. People tend to have um, broader immune responses if they're vaccinated, infected, and then vaccinated again, or infected then vaccinated again. So it may be that the kind of the best protection is to have vaccination, then infection, and then maybe additional vaccinations to let the immune system get ready for the new variants that are coming out. Um, so it's kind of complicated, and it's even more complicated now because if you're doing a study, in the original version, we were taking people who'd never seen COVID and had never been infected, had never been vaccinated. Now, a lot of the studies have to really kind of sort out. Now, are the people in this study people who got 2 doses or 3 doses of vaccine without any infection? Or are they people who got 2 doses of vaccine, infection, and then another dose? Because unfortunately, that changes the protective responses that we see. Um, and it makes it much more complicated for people to interpret the information that's coming out. But I guess the bottom line here is if you were vaccinated and got infected, and hopefully didn't get sick, then the protective immune responses actually are slightly broader. And the types of immune responses that are generated not only include the antibodies, the infection fighting proteins that bind to the virus and inactivate it, but also a strengthening of the ability of the body's, we call it cellular immune system, the cells in the body immune system that kill virally infected cells. Those may be stronger too, and those may actually be a part of the memory that protects you against the severe disease. So again, it's complicated by the way coronavirus COVID-19 has attacked us, um, and the rollout of vaccines, and it's just going to complicate how we approve and use the new set of vaccines. Did I answer your question? I kind of went on.
Yeah, it's just I think people got to still realize that this virus is relatively still a new virus, and because it has changed so much, and the evolution of this virus for the last 2.5 years is just keeping all of the experts, the scientists like yourself, uh, on your toes, trying to figure out what the heck is this thing going to do next. The other question, as it relates to vaccines, is we've had doctors on our show that are concerned about waning immunity. And I will say this: my daughter, before I forget, my daughter got COVID. She was unvaccinated. She got it pretty bad.
Uh,
And then, of course, as soon as she recovered, she asked the doctor, "When can I get my vaccine?" She got her vaccine. She got her second shot. She just recently caught COVID again, but the severity of the illness was it lasted for a couple days only, and it was kind of
yeah.
like the flu. So it was obvious that the infection plus the vaccine plus the full range of vaccines helped her in the second bout.
Yeah, I think that if there's anything that's clear from, now probably hundreds of papers and observations, and then of course being a doctor, I have like now my clinical experience of colleagues at work and friends and acquaintances who've been vaccinated and infected. And some people have, not completely, mild disease, but it's, not disease necessarily requiring that they go to the hospital, even in people who are over 90 um, and have been vaccinated and boosted in Korea. So there's no doubt that vaccination is important. And when you look at China, right, one of the reasons that they had lockdown after lockdown and they couldn't let go, the same way Korea did, or Singapore did, or Australia has done now, is that they hadn't fully vaccinated the elderly. At the point where the lockdown started, China had 50% of its elderly unvaccinated. And if you're
Wow.
thinking about the group that suffers the most when COVID goes out into the community, it's the elderly. So now they're up near 90% have gotten the first round of vaccinations with the original set of Chinese vaccines, which probably aren't as good as the RNA vaccines or the vaccines that we used in the States. Um, but they're getting, I don't know if they're ever going to be fully ready to let go the way, and start resume, life as normal. But there's maybe some thawing now of the strict isolation. They've announced that the quarantine will not be a month anymore. They're shortening the
Good.
quarantine in China. So again, vaccination is an important part of a policy that allows us to gradually, resume, knowing that, and we hope, and I am pretty sure that the US CDC, and I hope the Department of Health in Hawaii are keeping an eye. So we're talking about, I call it sentinel surveillance because that's the word we use for in HIV. We can't know everywhere in the United States at all times exactly the number of people, but the government has to be able to have a good representative sampling of people from around the United States, including Hawaii and elsewhere, to be able to tell when rates are going up. And remember, hospitalizations are a marker, but they're a marker that's 2 weeks late.
Mhm.
Or I'm sorry, deaths. Hospitalizations are a week late, deaths are 2 weeks late. So the government has to have some system for tracking. Now, the UK has a system, and that's where the data on, well, if we think 5% of people in England are potentially infected uh, currently. Um, and those kinds of surveillance systems are really important. And from that surveillance system, then you can do sequencing. And you don't have to sequence every virus in the United States. You just have to make sure that you're sampling enough. And when you see something odd, take another sample and see if it's common. And that's how. And so you imagine, right? South Africa, it's a lower middle income country. They're the ones who told us actually originally about Alpha. They're the ones who detected Delta. And they're the ones who, Beta. And they're the ones who picked up Omicron. And they don't have the resources to sequence every virus in South Africa. But the way they've set up the collection system, they've been able to very efficiently tell when something new arises and what its penetration is in the population without having to do 100, like Europe was doing 170,000 sequences when South Africa was doing 300. But who picked up Omicron? It was South Africa
Yeah.
because they had. So you don't have to do massive expenditures. You just have to be smart about what you're doing, and hopefully that's one of the things that they're looking into. Um, and in Korea, they again are doing a very similar approach. They're not sequencing every virus, but they're doing enough so that the government can tell and then react if things are changing.
Yeah, here in Hawaii, as you probably know, we were doing 14, 15,000 tests a day. We're down to a fourth, of that.
Yeah.
Obviously accounts for the lower case numbers. But Department of Health Director Dr. Libby Char was on the spotlight last week, and she said that she was always her recommendation was always, as we see these cases growing, as we see the new introductions of variants, that it was always her position to require the indoor mask mandate or indoor require indoor masking because we're seeing the clusters show up from workplaces and schools.
Mhm.
But of course, it's a policy decision that the government has to make, and not the director of the Department of Health. So we don't have any right now. We really don't have any safety measures in place. They took away the safe travels. They took away the feds took away the masking requirement in planes. Really giving that variants an opportunity to come into Hawaii, which is really sad uh, because we have an opportunity to keep a large majority of these new infections out
Yeah,
without
it's it. I mean, in Korea we have the indoor mask mandate, and 2 weeks ago we had actually the first gathering. We have people who work to do these COVID trials and other vaccine trials all over the world, and they haven't been together face to face for 2.5 years. So they had the first regathering of this group of maybe 30 people or 40 people, and we had a cluster, even though we with the indoor mask mandate. But the thing is, I think I joked about this on maybe on your show once. Koreans are really good about wearing masks if you go outside. Even today, even without the outdoor mask mandate, you see people with masks on, and indoors, everyone's wearing a mask. The problem is they're on until they're off. And when are they off? When you're eating, um, and or doing the other things that involve drinking water, or because again, coffee breaks and things. Um, and so it's important to keep the masks on indoors, for us, because we still have 10,000 cases a day that we know of. Um, and, you know, and for some of us, like, I'm not so afraid. I don't want to get COVID, but I'm anticipating that it's going to happen sooner or later. But it's enormous. It's disruptive. I can't do things. I can't go face to face to have meetings with people. I wouldn't be able to travel for, a period of time. So it would be disruptive. Um, but I'm actually kind of pretty sure that at some point I'll get exposed and infected.
Yeah,
Um,
I think we can all expect at some point. I mean, we can be as safe as possible. I'll just say for myself, I hate, it's become a non-issue for me. It's a habit now. I wear a mask whenever I go indoors. I'm always wearing a mask. And the reason I wear that mask is I have an 86-year-old mother-in-law who we see quite often. And I am so afraid because I personally know, as you and most of our viewers, many people that have COVID that did not know they had COVID. And the fact that they were feeling okay, they felt like they could take off the mask to go hug that person, right? And say
okay.
hello. Hawaii is a very hugging state, right?
Hmm.
I would not want to be the one. And my mother-in-law is vaccinated, boosted, but she's 86.
Yeah.
I would not want to be the one to inadvertently pass this nasty virus to her. And when I see people in gatherings, when I see people hanging out, and you see on social media all the parties and everyone's dancing and doing whatever they do without masks, outside of their family unit, outside of their circle of the people that they hang around with pretty much every day, and then they wonder why we still have COVID. Well, that is why we have COVID.
Yeah, my dad's 90, and we had a family. I wasn't there, but I guess we had a family gathering, and there were infections. And I think even though he's vaccinated and boosted, my brother and I were really worried that he might have caught it. But he spent most of his time out on the lanai, so I think he ended up not being exposed as heavily as some of the people who were indoors. But yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying. And so I think with COVID, you know, we have good drugs. In the U.S., you have tests and diagnostics that you can do yourself. Um, and I think that it's learning to do things safely in a way that doesn't pose a risk to other people is what we need to think about. I mean, and Hawaii is probably the best place for this. I mean, we never probably articulated the right message around masks, which is we mask to protect other people. Um, it's the same reason we don't smoke indoors anymore. Well, most of us don't smoke indoors because we know that the smoke from cigarettes, secondhand smoke, we call it, causes 30 to 40,000 deaths a year in the United States. Well, COVID caused 1 million deaths. So if the idea here is that we wear masks because we're concerned about other people. Um, and and yes, we're protecting ourselves, and that's important. And the masks do keep you from touching your face and doing things because they're just in the way. Um, but again, I think we should still be careful because there are still vulnerable populations. They're not necessarily so. When I say fully vaccinated, that means now they're up to date in their boosters as well. Um, this, the uptake of boosters in the United States actually is lagging behind. In Korea, the booster uptake was over 90%. It's
Wow.
way below that in the US. And
I understand it's, and I can't, this is the number I'm remembering is like 40% uh,
yeah,
booster rate in the United States.
I think that we don't have the same messaging around the need for the booster immunizations. Um, and so, but now the US had that wave of Omicron, and it ended up infecting a huge number of people. So they got naturally boosted. But in 3 to 6 months, they'll be infectable again. I mean, we know that. We actually have seen people infected with more than one Omicron.
Yeah.
Um, so, and so this is just a bit of the. So I'm a virologist at heart, and we know that we have this thing. The viruses mutate, right? They can change individual pieces of their genetic information, and COVID is much slower than HIV. But it does change itself, and we know that because we've got BA4, BA5, 2.12, and we have all these different varieties of Omicron, and so we know the virus can change, but the virus can also recombine. And imagine switching genetic information. So if a person has two different Omicron infections, it can swap pieces of genetic information within that person. So what may come out is actually a combination of BA4 and BA1, or whatever the new version is. So the recombination is something that we worry about, and we know that it's happened. Um, they call it, remember, Deltacron. They've actually
Mhm.
found some combinations of Delta and Omicron, and so far none of them have been worse than Omicron itself. But again, I think that's one of those theoretical concerns that we always have in the back of our mind, that we worry that we're going to start seeing this. We know that there are parts of the world where there is a different, an older variant of concern, not even Omicron, circulating with Omicron, um, and that could be a problem. Anyway, so
Yeah. Speaking of the messaging, when we started 2.5 years ago, there was a very strong push. In fact, in Hawaii, the campaign was all about wearing your mask to protect others because that's our culture, right? That's just the way we are.
yeah,
So there was a very strong push to convince people to wear your mask to help others or to protect others. And people really, they responded to that because that's just how we are. Now we don't really have the messaging, and for whatever reason, I think once the federal funding ended, so did a lot of the programming, the services. I think a lot of that went away when the state realized that they had to pay for it themselves. But we don't have that. In fact, and this is one of the questions I wanted to ask. There's a couple of people running for office that are actually claiming that the pandemic is over and that we're endemic. And I wanted to get your opinion on. I haven't found any medical person, no medical expert, to agree with that statement that the pandemic is over and we're now endemic. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So do you remember Yogi Berra? It ain't over till it's over. It's not over, and I think that the problem here is that in the mind of many people, in fact, in the mind of many people who are leaders of countries, you know, we're beyond it, and you know they're dealing. You know, the G7. There was something on COVID, but they were focused on Ukraine and inflation, and you know, sanctions for Russia. So if the politicians aren't focusing on it, then you know who's going to be minding the store? And you know, unless there's an intense political focus on it, um, there's it's going to be difficult to keep people focused on it. And you know, as more and more people are saying, well, you know, it's not a problem. It's just now it's like the flu, and you'll be over it in a couple of days. As long as that's starting and it's not being opposed and there's not good messaging, you know, we're and this there, I was on another panel and we were talking about for this magazine called The Economist, and most of the people on the panel were from the Middle East for this particular version of the this report, and you know, and it's true. They were saying, you know, we can't get the government to think about this because in their mind, you know, they vaccinated everybody. There are infections, but they're under control, and you know there are other problems to deal with, um, and the message has to be that it's still here, it's still a problem, and could be a problem. In the meantime, though, what is the government going to do? And I think this is where it's critical. I mean, we don't do a good job in preventive medicine, in taking steps to prevent disease. You know, the United States system is really around intervention, um, intervening, you know, doing surgery, you know, taking care of cancer. But the things that we can do to prevent disease are cost effective. Um, you know, if it's something simple, which is hard actually for many of us, diet and exercise, or reducing the salt in our diet, or not smoking, or you know, not drinking excessive amounts of alcohol, which depends on your definition of what excessive is. But preventive medicine is best, and we don't do a good job about in talking about it. We don't fund it. You know, I remember in Thailand when we were there, when I was doing a HIV vaccine trial, the Ministry of Public Health is called public health because its primary mission is prevention. And so they were doing a nationwide, and I mean nationwide, exercise program. And so for the next 30 days, people would gather outside their local district, actually sub-district health center, and they would be encouraged by the healthcare workers to come in and do the group exercise because they wanted to make sure that everyone knew how to exercise so that you know they could lower blood pressure, you know, improve tolerance. Actually, it's shown maybe to improve longevity. So again, you know, we aren't really good, and this would fall into that same group of things that we need to do to prevent disease.
Yeah, prevention is always the smarter way to go. The unfortunate reality, and I don't expect you. I know you don't do politics, but um, prevention uh, doesn't provide for profits in the pharmaceuticals. I mean, don't you don't have to respond, Doc. I respect your,
No, no, no.
but I mean
I
that's the
understand.
reality, right? If we prevent it, then there's no treatments required, and then all these big money companies start to complain. I know in Japan, and I don't know if it still exists, but I know many companies in Japan will have their employees all go to the rooftop of the building to do exercise, or they have a
Yeah,
special room dedicated for their breaks where they can go in and even if it's just to move around a little bit, and they encourage that, and in some cases mandate it because they're focusing on public health. And I think that's one of the bigger frustrations I have. Is that we're such a reactive country here in America. We are so reactive.
Yeah, it's funny. There was a sad statistic, right, that more Americans died during Omicron than during Delta because of the rapidity of spread of Omicron and the number of people who were infected. But the unknown number here is that every one of those hospitalizations on average cost $20,000. So if you take that, Delta cost us like 15 million, oh, billion, sorry, 15 billion, and Omicron cost us $20 billion. So there's a cost, and it's being borne, and I guess hospitals aren't necessarily going bankrupt either. But prevention is important, and for COVID, our concept of prevention now has to be, and as we think about the economics of it, we have to not only think about deaths, we have to think about long-term outcomes and morbidity and long-term illness and sickness and time off from work and all these other things. And I bet that if we looked, it would still be cost effective to vaccinate. Um, and then this should be used as an argument to politicians, policymakers, to encourage the prevention message and the booster message and but we have to get better at this rather than the remember the old public service announcements. Um, During the worst time in Thailand, when HIV was really threatening the country, I really literally 12% of army recruits from certain parts were HIV positive at 18 years old. And the country thought it was going to be a real problem. There was a mandatory HIV prevention message 2 minutes out of every hour on TV. We don't do that. Um, and and those are things that you'd think would be simple. We'd have to do them on social media and other things, but yeah, it's so I get to see Ed Case on Monday, the congressman from District 1, I think, which is Honolulu. Um, but I'll tell him that we spoke and that there's um, we want them to do more.
I know Congressman Case quite well. He's actually been on our show, so please let him know
Ah,
that I said hi and let him know that we need to be more active. It was interesting today. There was a candidate forum on Star Advertiser. It was a live forum, and it's supposed to have only been a regular forum. It ended up being a debate, but one of the questions that was asked was if if they supported an indoor mask mandate, because of the numbers that we're seeing. It's crazy. We're the top in the country right now. Hawaii is number one in case
really?
counts per capita. Yeah, we went from last place to first place. We are leading the country, which is horrific per capita.
Hmm.
And
Right.
every single one of them said they will not support the mask mandate, which I thought was quite shocking. I, thought, I see your face. I thought it was shocking. I just could not believe
I mean,
that.
that's interesting because several of the counties in California went back on masks, and now that the wave is receding, they've come off. But
Yeah,
it's interesting that, but I think it's a political issue,
yeah, it's
and
unfortunate.
this is the problem with the way the public health system in the U.S. and is really fragmented. So it's not only 50 state departments of health, but it's also the county departments of health, and there's no central control or instruction. So in Korea, the Ministry of Health has so there are district health offices, and actually sometimes they assign people from the government ministry to work in these district health offices, and they're all linked. The messages are all the same from top to bottom, and you need that. And during a pandemic, a public health emergency, you know, it's the government should have some ability, and maybe this is something that well, actually, it is something that they're working on. Improvements in the public health system to make it a bit more responsive, linked, so that instructions are there. We have the Department of Defense, the Army Reserve, the Army National Guard, at every level. We don't have the same thing for public health. Yet, COVID killed more people in the United States than all of our wars put together, which is really just remarkable. Um, so again, maybe we need to start thinking about, you know, not only COVID, which is continuing, but the next pandemic. It might be pandemic influenza, or it could be another coronavirus. It's hard to say. There were a whole bunch of questions about monkeypox. I don't know if you have time or if you were interested or.
I want to respect your time. I did want you to chat a little bit about the long COVID, because that's another thing that you mentioned a little bit about it earlier, about how it's affecting the economy, it's affecting the marketplace, it's affecting businesses that cannot get their people to work, because they're sick. Um, monkeypox is probably a show in and of itself, but whatever you want to chat on, Doc.
Oh, no, no, I'm happy to. I mean, it's. I think long COVID is really interesting, and the part that I don't understand quite as well, because I don't think all the data are in, is the longer term effects of COVID on children. Um, so we were in a symposium in Sweden, and some folks from South Africa were there, and they said this has had a devastating effect on our education system. So kids had not been to school for 2 years, and they don't have the resources to do televised or video learning. Um, and it meant that, I mean, you have two cohorts, a two year block of people who are behind, and it's going to be very difficult for those countries to catch up, and that will have economic consequences. um, and we know that the same thing was true. Not all kids are capable of video learning. And then at the same time, we know now, that Omicron hit so many school children. I mean, there are cases of lingering, that is, greater than 2 months of symptoms in the youngest populations as well. By and large, kids, shrugged it off and were okay. But there are, longer term consequences. And, what risk are we willing to take for children? I mean, that's I guess, the real question. Um, and then for adults, if it's in fact 20% of the population has symptoms that persist, and some of the symptoms are not benign. They're long-term fatigue. They are, difficulty concentrating, which if you have a job that requires concentration, or even one that requires you to focus, it becomes very difficult to do things. And this weakness, you know, there are associated neurological symptoms, including depression, um, and and all of these things are, things that are difficult for us. I mean, it's difficult for us, for instance, to look at syndromes like chronic fatigue, which was actually a much bigger issue, a few years ago. Um, but we're seeing this now with COVID. And how do we deal with this? And how do we make sure that people can have healthy and productive lives? Because that's really about what um, is to prevent death and to prevent unnecessary illnesses from COVID. And we think vaccination does lower the risk of long COVID. Um, but again, it's difficult to actually have a study that shows that. Some of the data that have come out have been in favor. Some of the data have been, you know, equivocal, not really making a strong statement on that. But I think many people believe that vaccination does have an impact on long COVID. Um, will antivirals like Paxlovid have an impact on long COVID? And again, there are clinical trials now ongoing to see if that in fact is the case. What's causing long COVID? The most recent thing that I saw was that there may be long-term replication, so the virus continues to grow in patches in the intestinal tract. And I think many people will remember back in the old days when we used to do all sorts of testing. And actually in Korea they would do testing, some of your bowel movement. People remained positive for extended periods of time, and we thought that was just a lot of virus in your nose and throat and lungs gradually getting excreted. But it could be that in some people there's longer term persistence of COVID-19, and so that's why they're testing Paxlovid in these conditions. Um,
Thanks, Doc. It is 3 o'clock. If you want to take a shot at monkeypox, we would definitely appreciate it. I know you're a busy dude, but if you want to take
yeah.
a shot at it, uh,
So, those of us who are older, have already been vaccinated against smallpox, but they stopped around 1980 in the United States. So I think the age is 50, is it 53 or something? Then you might not have been vaccinated against smallpox if you're younger than that. There's one way to check, which is to look on your arm. There should be a star-shaped scar. Um, not It's not always visible in everyone. But for instance, I have now two because when in 2001, when we had the anthrax scare, the military vaccinated everyone again. So I got vaccinated a second time. The smallpox vaccine works against monkeypox. There are two versions of it. The U.S. stockpile is primarily the older version, the one that I got from a company that was called a Canvas, and I think Canvas is now a part of GSK. Um, but the U.S. has a large stockpile, I think 300 million doses of that. Um, and the problem with a Canvas is that it was associated with, it's the old version, and it has more side effects. There were cases of um, inflammation of the heart, and some reported deaths. Is it better than getting smallpox? Well, the mortality rate from smallpox in the olden days was 10% for the what we called the great pox, and then there was a minor version of it that was 3%. That's far, far higher than the risk of bad outcome from the smallpox vaccine. Um, there's a newer version from a company called Bavarian Nordic. It's a European company. It's called Jynneos, and we call it MVA, Modified Vaccinia Ankara. And I know about it because our program made an HIV vaccine that was based on this. You know how the COVID vaccines are based in adenovirus, chimpanzee adenovirus for AstraZeneca, and adenovirus type 26 for the Johnson and Johnson vaccine. Well, we were using this MVA for an HIV vaccine as a part of an HIV vaccine. It's very safe. It's been used in millions of people, and it's the original smallpox vaccine, but certain segments have been taken out, and that's made the virus much less likely to cause side effects. So it's considered a much safer vaccine than the original smallpox vaccine. Um, and so those work. And then there are drugs, and the U.S. has a stockpile of a drug that works against smallpox, and it works against monkeypox as well. Um, how will the United States roll this out? So in the end, remember, smallpox was disappeared, right? Smallpox exists itself in two labs, one in the United States and one in Russia, theoretically. No other country is supposed to have kept stocks of smallpox. Um, the In the end, we were tracking down people who had smallpox and then doing vaccination around them so that none of the people that were potentially being exposed would develop smallpox. And that ring vaccination technique is something that can be used. Or you can target populations at higher risk. So you have to identify the populations. In the U.S., there were men who have sex with men were involved in some of the early transmission cases, maybe presumably traced back to some initial events last month. And people at potential risk, the U.S. is offering vaccination for that, and the stockpile exists. So um, whether more widespread vaccination is necessary, we don't think so yet. There have been 3,400 cases reported worldwide. Easier to report and track in European countries and the United States than in the places where monkeypox is we say endemic, which would be Nigeria, Democratic West Africa, sorry, Democratic Republic of the Congo. Um, so hopefully, the WHO will come up with recommendations. Countries will look into their stockpiles, and I guess a lot of countries are trying to buy vaccine from Jynneos, from Bavarian Nordic.
Doc, real quick, and this will be the last question, I promise, because I saw this question pop up in some internal discussion going on. Transmission of monkeypox is not considered a sexually transmitted disease. Or is it monkeypox? I know that the stories that are happening here are saying that that it's been amongst people that are having sexual contact with others. But this how is monkeypox uh, transmitted or shared with others? Is it only through sex or is it through close contact?
So that's an interesting question. So when we talk about sexually transmitted diseases, we usually are meaning diseases that are transmitted during sex. I mean, or by the, you know, by the act of sex. So a disease like gonorrhea or syphilis or HIV or herpes simplex type 2. You know, the sexual act, because the lesions or the virus are present, or the bacteria are present in genitals, genital fluid, etc. Monkeypox and smallpox are transmitted by contact. So there's contact during sex. So yes, it can be transmitted during sex. Could it be in secretions? Yes, possibly. Has it been transmitted from mother to baby? Yes, probably, but during the passage, maybe out of the birth canal. So it isn't a classical sexually transmitted disease in the way that gonorrhea or syphilis is. It's contact. And there are possibly airborne related transmissions, but these are so remember the big argument, but now I think it's pretty much settled that the smallest air particles that float in the air actually over significant distances transmit COVID. We call them aerosols. The larger form, or respiratory droplets, are much larger, and they drop to the floor pretty quickly after they leave a person. So if there is any non-direct contact transmission, it may be in these heavier droplets. I don't think that all the public health agencies around the world have said this though. Um, so there's really not that much risk. It's primarily contact um, and direct contact with secretions, so or pustules.
Got it. Well, Doc, thank you so much. Appreciate you spending the time. I know you're busy. We appreciate you educating us again. Anything you want to say to your Hawaii uh, viewers, fans? You
Yeah.
got fans. I got to tell you, you got
No,
fans. You definitely
no,
have fans.
I want to say thank you to you, Mel. I hope is Charlie okay? And he's
Yeah,
okay.
he's just working. He's just working too much.
Yeah, yeah.
He's
And
working
this is
too
a
much.
bad time for you guys. So I apologize for that. But thanks for letting me come on the show. And one of these days we'll get back there, and I'll be sure to say hi to Representative Case and
Yeah, just
let him
tell
know.
tell him what you just told us. And if they cannot figure it out, I don't know what more to say. I guess it really boils down to us taking care of ourselves, us wearing
Yeah,
our masks,
yeah.
and
One of
just
the
to
things.
clarify, because I saw some comments, the masks, while it does protect others, Doc, there is no dispute that. Well, I shouldn't say that because there's a lot of people that don't believe this. Masks do provide the person wearing the mask, right?
They do. They offer some protection. I think some people think it might be 30% efficacy in preventing infection. It differs, and that was probably generated during Alpha through Delta and not necessarily through Omicron. Um, but the mask protecting others is much more solid. Um, and so there is substantial protection if you're wearing a mask, if you're infected and are wearing a mask in reduction of transmission. Um,
All right.
so one of the big things for us with Representative Case is to convince him that the United States should somehow support the International Vaccine Institute. I'll let you know how it goes.
I mean, I
Anyway,
would have assumed that we have already done that. So, have we not done that?
no, no, it's been a long discussion with them.
Okay.
But I mean, we're the work that we do is pretty well supported now, and I think COVID has just reemphasized how important vaccines are. And so, it's not only COVID vaccines, adults need vaccinations too, from your, annual flu shot to, vaccines against pneumonia and against shingles
Shingles.
as you get older. And and preventive medicine is again critical, and it keeps you from having the more expensive and more deadly um, occurrences of disease.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks, Doc. Hey, to the viewers out there, to our villagers, you can follow Dr. Kim at Jerome Kim on Facebook. He's on Twitter. Just search him up. He has a lot of information on his page. I've been following the International Vaccine Institute ever since we met, Doc, and it's just a great resource. And I'll make sure we talk to our congressional delegation to try to encourage them to at least start have that discussion and to support it. It's so important the work that you guys do. So thank you so much. So our
Thanks,
viewers,
Mel.
thank you again for jumping in at an awkward time. We'll replay this tonight at 7 o'clock. For the rest of our viewers, you guys all stay safe, take care, God bless.
Yeah.
Aloha.
Aloha
All right, Doc.
and